Hello, everybody. It's Dave Neal, stand-up comic and host of Bachelor Nation News. Happy Monday to everyone out there. I hope you're having a fantastic start to the work week. I'm here for you on the West Coast after 2 weeks of stand-up comedy shows and Bachelor meetups and brunch dates and so much going on. I'm finally back home. We were in Nashville and Vegas and New York City, but good to be back here in cloudy Los Angeles, California. And we've got a Kaitlyn Bristowe, Shawn Booth story. Yeah, that's right. The story keeps going. It's actually very interesting, and when I was on Kaitlyn's podcast Off the Vine, she actually broke news that she was contacted by Shawn, and he essentially said, "I moved on with my life, and I'd prefer not to speak negatively about a relationship that ended 5 years ago." And we're going to discuss this with some nuance because, of course, it's nice to not publicly talk about your exes. Sure, that'd be a decent thing to do, but when you're sharing your story and when you have your own podcast, by all means, talk about them. Kaitlyn Bristowe hasn't talked about Shawn in a way that's slanderous, in a way that's defamatory. She just shares her story. They were in an untenable position coming off the show, and I don't want to call it a love triangle, but of course, other exes and other people she was dating, that's how the show works. It gets muddy. And then contestants can go on to do podcast and monetize that. And now Shawn's got his own podcast, and while he hasn't talked negatively about Kaitlyn, I don't really believe she's been talking negatively about him. The internet and the way it works with news, media, entertainment journalism has a way of, clickbaiting conversations to make them sound worse than they are. So if Shawn wasn't listening to what Kaitlyn actually said, he might think that it was, oh, there she is talking negative about me. But we'll get into all of that right now. Do me a favor, follow me on Instagram at DNeals for show updates and all the other information that's going on. And also patreon.com/Dave Neal. I'll be going live at 10 a.m. this morning to discuss all the behind the scenes of what's been going on with me, and every afternoon Bachelor Rush Hour. On the afternoon's podcast, I'll discuss my trip east, but very interesting. I'll give you the sneak peek right here. My wife and I got to meet and hang out with Pilot Peter Weber. I have a lot to say about him. It's all positive. Believe it or not, I don't know why you wouldn't, but he's a very nice guy. We met him and Olivia Caridi and some other folks from the Bachelor world. So we'll discuss that on the podcast this afternoon, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Now, before I get into the Kaitlyn story, it's coming right after this. I have to say, on Friday, I released my latest episode of Driving with Dave. Now, I knew it wouldn't perform as well as Katie Thurston or Susie Evans because they're big, verified alumni, but I interviewed Ryan Neal. Ryan Neal was on Listen to Your Heart, and he's a musician, and we've maintained our friendship, and he's a really nice guy. I interviewed him while I was in Nashville. But I got this comment from Kate, which I wanted to read. Kate said, "Loved this interview. To be honest, I wasn't keen at first to watch because I wasn't a fan of Listen to Your Heart and how it was produced. However, I gave it a watch, and I watched it the whole way through. I recommend anyone else do the same. A great insight into the music industry. Dave has a great way with his questions and making his guests feel comfortable." So here's my little, not challenge, but my ask for you guys. If you haven't watched it already, please give it a watch. It's a new project that I'm doing, these Driving with Daves. They take a hell of a lot of time to produce, but my goal is to sort of work my way through the different stories that exist in the Bachelor world. Stories that you might not hear by watching the show. And I'm telling you right now, we're going to have fun. It's going to be interesting. Come along for the ride. Click the link to that. It'll be in the bio, or you can watch it as soon as this video is over. All right, so let's get into it. So what the heck is going down here? Shawn's response to Kaitlyn. Now, before we share that, Kaitlyn told me, and she said she has never said this publicly, but she finally wanted to air it out on her podcast, Off the Vine, but she told me exactly what Shawn had to say. But first, before we share Shawn's response, here is a nice little Russian doll here. We have our third time airing this. Here's what Kaitlyn said to her now fiance Jason Tartick regarding her ex, Shawn Booth. We have to listen to it because the only way to get full context is to hear it out of her mouth.
But it was always, if I was there, then he was invited. And I think that on top of already feeling emasculated on the show where you're not the one and there's other relationships building and you thought it was you the whole time and then you realize it wasn't.
Being in his feud with Nick Viall. It's funny when people talk about the fragile male ego. Yeah. Okay, so of course Shawn Booth wasn't getting invited to events. She was the star. He would get invited as arm candy to her. And that sucks because everyone wants to be the lead in their own story and the hero, but he was her arm candy, just like Blake Moynes was the arm candy to Katie Thurston and Dale Moss to Claire Crowley. That's just how it works. And, for some people that have an ego, that might be hard to swallow.
It was like getting down to the end where we both just didn't see it going anywhere, but it felt like he was hanging on until his gym opened. And that's where I felt used.
So she says it felt like, and this is a good use of, therapy terms. It felt like she's saying, it felt like to me, this is how I felt. Not to say he would have done this, but it felt like he was hanging on and I felt used. And then, of course, this leads to Kaitlyn Bristowe says she feels like ex-fiance Shawn Booth used her professionally. Now, again, this isn't the most clickbaity title. It's actually not a bad job here, but it still doesn't read the same way as if you were to listen to it, right? So now let's go to what Kaitlyn has to say regarding Shawn responding to her comments. Sometimes you'll hear someone like you had a recent episode where you mentioned your ex, and I was like, oh, they're going to go off of this. And of course they do. But we are talking about it in a long form where, Us Weekly, these titles they write, they take quotes and then they summarize leading up to the quote.
Yeah.
And it's like, journalistically, it's ridiculous what they. And of course, and again, I'm not wrong. That's what they do. They'll use quotes and then summarize and then use more quotes and then mash it all together like some kid's student art project. But by the way, can I just for 1 second take a victory lap and pat myself on the back? I mean, here I am. We're having a good interview, and I'm thinking, what can we talk about that's going to make the news? And I don't even think I do this on purpose. I think it's the middle child in me that loves to get tea out of people. They get away with because you don't have a hurtful bone in your body. You were just sharing your life experience.
When you say that, you're like, the media always has this headline or something they pick from it. But really, so in all the last few podcasts I've tried to be conscious of how I speak about my ex because
Shawn.
I think it's because of inner child work I did. I wrote a whole letter to him in like this inner child work because it was to people who you still hold resentment against or people that have hurt you and all this stuff. So as everybody knows, I'm such an open book. So I talk about everything. I still talk about my ex from Germany where people are like, we've heard it a million times, Kaitlyn, but it's how I process things. It's how I.
By the way, I just wish I knew. For those that are listening on Bachelor Rush Hour, the audio only, Kaitlyn is in this like really nice matching jumpsuit, like sweatsuit. Kaitlyn, give me a heads up. I would have worn a sweatsuit. We could have gotten pajama party here.
Work through things, and I'm also an open book. So on the latest few podcasts, I don't know if you've heard that I actually kind of try and speak highly of Shawn, where I say, like, I have complete compassion for what he went through. And if I say this is on me. This is my feelings. I'm not saying it's true. Like, I'll try and really have empathy and compassion for his side because I'm like,
and you should be allowed to share your feelings and not have the internet blow up because like you shouldn't have to protect your ex. She's allowed to share her feelings. It's the story that she went through.
It's been so much time and I don't need to speak negatively anymore. And so on Jason's podcast, I had said something about how I felt like he used me. I didn't even think I said fame, but media took it that way. I felt like...
No, she didn't say fame. She said professionally.
Where we both just didn't see it going anywhere, but it felt like he was hanging on until his gym opened. And that's where I felt used.
Okay, so she felt used because he was hanging on because he was opening his gym. And again, it doesn't mean he used her. It means she felt used. These are simple things, folks. You have to be able to have these conversations. You can feel a certain way, even if it wasn't the other person's intentions. You're holding on to so much bitterness or whatever.
I was used at the end. He was hanging on to the relationship to open his gym. And to me, I'm like, well, I was hanging on to the relationship because I didn't want to lose the dog Tucker. Like, we were both hanging on to things for certain reasons.
Yeah, he's working on building this thing. Like,
right.
And
I said, this is probably on me and my insecurities and blah, blah. Who knows if it's true. But the media, of course, took it and said, Shawn hung on to Kaitlyn's fame until he opened his gym. Well, then fast forward to a few days later, I get a text from Shawn. And I haven't talked to him in years. And he goes...
Now, at this point, I'm listening going, oh, boy, I'm getting a one-on-one right now.
I don't know if you're still living in Nashville, but I'm like, he's tired of media reaching out to him and asking for comments. And he goes, I've moved on with my life and I would prefer to not speak negatively about a relationship that ended 5 years ago. And I was like,
oh boy. Did you ask him if he actually listened to it?
Yes. So I took some time to process.
That's the first thing whenever I'm having an argument with someone over, something they read or clickbait, our critical thinking skills are so bad right now. Kaitlyn's not in charge of what journalists do or entertainment news. She's in charge of what she says. And it's part of the 4 agreements. Be impeccable with your word. And I think she was there.
What he said. And I wanted to be like, okay, I'll be cognizant of this for next time as I'm talking about him, but not negatively. So I wrote him back and I just said, hey, yeah, you know what? I've been in your position, maybe not in the media, but I've had people around town tell me certain things that definitely offended me about what you've said and done. I've never known how to go about that because I didn't know if it was necessary to reach out to you because we have both moved on with our lives. But I understand that must be frustrating hearing those things. I just need you to know that if you actually listen to the podcast, I try and speak highly and not negatively about you. And happy to chat any further if you want to hear in context what I said, but I'll be cognizant moving forward about how I speak of you.
I love how corporate it's
It's so corporate.
Best.
Yeah. Warm wishes.
Toodles.
Toodaloo. But he also said in the first message, like, I don't know if you want to get together and talk. And so I said, I don't know how you want to go about it, but like, yeah, I've heard shit too. And then there was just silence.
Yeah, I mean, just nuance goes away in print media, and again, I'm no moral barometer.
Okay, so here, look, I'll give you my solution. You guys want to know my solution? So Kaitlyn's got her hit podcast Off the Vine. Shawn's got a new podcast. I don't know. It's called In the Booth or something like that. I don't know. I think what I think they should do, and this is just me as an audience member, and again, maybe this isn't best for their mental health, but what I think they should do is go on each other's podcast. I think they should air a 2-part sit down with each other. Maybe on Kaitlyn's, she gets to interview him, and on his, he gets to interview her, and they should hash it out. It'll help both of their channels. They'll both get a lot of equity from it. They'll both get a lot of new earballs and eyeballs or whatever. You'll get Shawn Booth's fans that maybe didn't like Kaitlyn will give Kaitlyn a shot, and maybe some of Kaitlyn's fans will give Shawn Booth a shot, or at the very least, they can maybe bury the hatchet once and for all and do it on their own terms. That's just what I think should be done. Don't tag them in it. If they don't want to do that, that's fine. Maybe they have perfectly moved on, but there is a difference between talking trash about your ex and talking about your ex, and I think Kaitlyn was not guilty of talking trash about her ex. I can understand how journalists in the world we live in with the way monetization works, I can understand the way that they would summarize their titles. The only thing we can do about that is to remind audiences to go to the original source. I don't know, the election season's coming up, right? It doesn't have to be a Bachelor, stupid Bachelor story. It's the geopolitical world that's out there. If you're getting your news from headlines, you are ignorant AF. If you're not listening to people's full speeches, their full campaign promises, the way they're voting, who's donating money to their campaigns. If you're not doing all of that, your vote is not honest because you're being manipulated by pieces of the truth. All right, folks. Well, if you want my truth, it'll be every afternoon in the Bachelor Rush Hour podcast. Since doing Kaitlyn's podcast, my podcast has grown about 15%. So I want to thank all of the new people that have found us over there. If you haven't checked out the podcast, it's audio only. You can go find it on your phone. It's free. And I have unique information. I'll be sharing more in depth about my New York, Nashville, and Vegas trips. And you can hear about my rendezvous with Pilot Pete and other Bachelor alumni. All right, more content coming to you right after this.